Hi, I'm Melanie Dykstra, and this is Cassie Webb, and we are both parents at Lovejoy ISD. We are both members of our parent support GT organization called the Lovejoy Gifted Association. And Lovejoy is a small school district in the northeast suburbs of Dallas. We both had a bill that was written in both the House and the Senate this past legislative session, targeting increasing the funding for GT services in public schools. It didn't end up passing this session, but we will never stop advocating for our kids. And so we're here to just build an army of parents that are willing to support and advocate for their own kids in the upcoming legislative sessions. So let me tell you first a little bit about my family. So this is my husband, Andy, of 25 years, and my three boys. They are Carson, Joel, and Elliot. Joel is actually the one on the far right, and he's the one I want to tell you a little bit more about. So Joel is a happy-go-lucky, funny, interesting, you never met a stranger kind of kid. But when he was 8 years old, he actually fell into clinical depression. He started crying at night, refusing to go to school. We were understandably distraught, not understanding what was going on with him. So we took him to a neuropsychologist and asked them to look at learning disabilities or anything else that we may have missed that was causing his depression. And when we got the report back, the neuropsychologist told us that he was clinically depressed and that he was also profoundly gifted. And at that point, she asked me to imagine going to a conference where you already knew all of the information, but you couldn't get up, look at your phone, walk around. And so it's just really, really boring. And then, as adults, we would be annoyed and really kind of peeved by the end of the day. But then to have to sit through that same conference day after day for weeks, months, and then years. And that was what my poor 8-year-old was going through. And so it turned out that all three of my kids ended up being gifted, but it was that moment that really was my wake-up call as a parent to figure out what it meant to be gifted and how to help educate my kids in a way that wasn't going to cause depression. So that's my why. That is why I'm so passionate about gifted education and gifted services for all kids, because Joel's just one, but there are so many kids in his same situation all over the state.
My why are my three beautiful elementary school girls. They have been identified as gifted learners, and we were blessed to have many different options in North Texas. We looked at all different types of schooling. We landed on Lovejoy ISD because of the excellence that it provided in its educational opportunities. I'm a product of gifted education. Growing up, my teachers in general education classes would get frustrated with me, and that really wasn't the best scene for me until I started getting gifted services where my teachers were seeing my idiosyncrasies as assets and really started to develop who I was and inspire me to eventually become a teacher myself. And I wanted that for my three girls. We moved to Lovejoy ISD in pursuit of this seemingly guaranteed situation where public schools in Texas are actually a right. Here's Article 7. Section 1, I'll read that it shall be the duty of the legislature of the state to establish and make suitable provision for the support and maintenance of an efficient system of public free schools. That's something that the state of Texas owes my family, owes my children. And when I started to observe this seemingly systematic underfunding over and over and over, not keeping up with inflation, seeing major programming being cut, some of the most precious and prized parts of our Lovejoy experience, like the GT program, was whittled down to size. I was proud to speak at the same Lovejoy ISD Board of Trustees meeting as Joel Dykstra to bemoan some of these major cuts that were going to impact my children. So I began to speak out. I began to connect that, wait, I'm a constituent that is to be served by my representation in Austin. And that representation is supposed to solve problems, not create problems. So I began to develop a voice. I began to understand, what does the law say? What did our Texas forefathers say about the guarantee of a public education for our students?
So let me tell you a little more about Lovejoy. So Lovejoy is a small school district. There's about 4,000 students from K through 12, and we excel in a lot of different areas, but we have a notoriously wonderful GT program, and people move from other parts of the state and even from other states to come to our GT program. Due to that, we actually have about 20% of our student population that qualifies for gifted and talented services. As a lot of you guys can probably understand, our school district spends way more money on their gifted and talented services than they receive funding for. And so as schools have had to tighten budgets and creative solutions have been proposed to try to save money, it often ends up really affecting the experience that our kids have in the classroom. And so after the session ended in 2023, we were kind of shocked that there was no increase in public school funding at all. And so that was kind of a wake-up call for our community to start paying attention to what was going on in Austin and to try to figure out how to influence a little bit more. So this is where our story begins, and it really started with two moms who got tired of sitting on the sidelines and decided to step up and try to do something about it. And those two parents were Cassie Webb and Aubrey Stock. And Aubrey couldn't be with us today, but she is just as much a part of the story as we are.
How does one start reaching out to their state representation? By not giving up. You just do it. You just call and you call and you call and you call and you call until you get a person. And for me, that took probably 30 phone calls over the course of 2023 to the very beginning of 2024. And I never got a call back from my representative's office. I was able to get through to the senator's office. They typically have more staff, and so I would have conversations. I would log my opposition or my support on various bills that were going through the session at that time. However, the day after the March primary in 2024, I saw our representative, Candy Noble, pulling out signs in a field, and I thought, oh my goodness, I'm on my way to drop off my child, but I will be right back and I will talk to her in person. She was gone, but I knew, okay, she's in town. I'm going to call her office. And sure enough, I got through to her district director and kept that man on the phone until he got me a meeting with other ladies from the Lovejoy PTO. I also serve on the council of Lovejoy PTOs. And we got a meeting scheduled with Representative Noble. We were insistent that she be there to discuss our budget shortfalls, our deficit budget that we continually were passing over and over year by year, cutting programs, feeling our pain points. We had a meeting with 6 ladies from the district that were heavily involved. We tried to discuss the basic allotment as a major issue, being behind why we are having to cut so much from our budget. And it's not like we're cutting excess or inefficiencies or people that really don't need to be working there. No, we were cutting really close to the heartwood of our entire Lovejoy ISD experience. And it was painful and it was harming our students. And when we were expressing these cuts, she seemed unaware. When we tried to connect the dots to the basic allotment not being on par with an inflation increase, she tended to change the subject. We came away from that meeting thinking, wow, well, we didn't get any deliverables, or we didn't feel like we made any progress, or we're on the same page at all. But one very good positive thing happened was that Aubrey Stock decided we needed some kind of visual representation of our pain points. We needed a visual representation of a timeline of the whittling away of our Lovejoy experience. And so she created this Losing Lovejoy graphic that explained from 2020 during COVID to present day at that time, 2024, what our experience has been diminished to. This was able to relate those pain points not only to our representation, that they might extend our voice into the Capitol, but also it united the community to rally around our common cause. We have got to get our funding corrected for inflation, or we will continue to lose what we hold dear in our education at Lovejoy. We got in contact with Missy Bender, who at the time was a trustee in residence with Raise Your Hand Texas, and she held a parent advocacy workshop where she taught us how to advocate smarter, not just louder, and not just more persistently. So she talked about what the backdrop was politically, how schools are actually funded. She talked about how important it was to put your personal experience into the anecdotes that you hand your representation in Austin. That way no one argues with your experience. And it's always helpful to bring the data with you. She also gave the advice, which Aubrey took and did this to the actual original Gifted and Talented statute. Aubrey found where it's codified where gifted and talented students receive a certain allotment, and Aubrey went into and made certain changes that we would like to see to benefit gifted and talented programs across Texas. I'll provide in the next slide a justification for why she changed the multipliers and the enrollment or the cap for eligibility. So back in the years before 2019, before the historic House Bill 3 passed to raise the basic allotment to that time $61.60, the gifted and talented multiplier on the basic allotment was 12%. So that meant a gifted and talented identified student received an extra 12% of the basic allotment to fund that programming. However, there was a maximum of 5% of average daily attending students could even qualify for that additional fund. Then at 2019, when House Bill 3 was passed, lifting the basic allotment up, the legislature essentially told GT programming, you need to use the basic allotment to fund your programs. We are not going to have a specific GT allotment for you any longer. In 2021, there was a cleanup bill, which was also House Bill 3 in 2021 during that session. That bill restored the GT allotment to, again, 5% maximum of the student population that could qualify. And it was a reduced multiplier of 7%. So not the original 12% of the basic allotment, but now it would be 7%. Where Aubrey was going with this proposed bill that we wanted to submit to Representative Noble was that we would bring that multiplier back to its historic 12% and also reflect the actual Texas state average of close to 10% of the entire body of Texas students being identified as gifted. Also, we are hoping to incentivize school districts to identify even more GT students within their populations. We had a second meeting with Representative Noble in June of 2024 when Aubrey decided let's pivot away from basic allotment and give a more targeted ask to our representation. We, of course, touched on the basic allotment because that's an algebraic part of how GT programs across the state receive their funding. But we moved into a specific bill that would capture an increase, a corrected, let's say, cap of 10% and a historically restored 12% multiplier on that GT allotment. That meeting went so much more successfully because we were able to resonate on the fact that Texas needs to invest in its gifted student population. Rural, suburban, urban, all over the state, there are students out there that are not being identified, and that is a loss to the future of Texas. So to incentivize school districts across the state to seek out who are we missing, who do we need to identify, who could qualify now for this lifted funding cap. That would be something that hopefully our representative and many others could get behind. The key to this meeting was to come prepared with all the data. So we had this time our Lovejoy losses timeline representing how the gifted and talented program especially was getting whittled down. We came with a much more mature understanding of how state funding actually ends up in different types of schools all over the state. But for me specifically, I wanted to know from the ground up, I wanted to build from scratch how the financial modeling works for my own school district. And so I got on the TEA website and downloaded the summary of finance sheets and was able to calculate and demonstrate the difference, the stark difference of how we receive much less funding per student in our district than the average Texas ISD. We are an outlier, and that is why our representative was getting the vast majority of her phone calls from our school district, is because we represent such a funding gap. Even when the Texas average is below what it needs to be for inflation, we were even further away from that point.
So one of the problems I think there is in getting support for gifted children is the pervasive lack of understanding about what giftedness really is. I mean, let's be honest, like most of us, even as parents of gifted kids, don't really know what it means to be gifted. A lot of times we think, oh, they should be getting straight A's, or they should, need less resources than the average kid, or maybe they have a leg up to get into the Ivy League schools. But ultimately, a gifted brain is actually just a little different from a neurotypical brain. And so we knew that if we wanted these legislators to really understand and appreciate who these kids were, we needed to give them a little bit of the science. So as we were going into this meeting with Candy Noble, we decided that I would start off by talking about Joel and his depression when he was 8 years old. And then I would describe giftedness like this. So we all have 4 lobes of our brain that really take care of a lot of the different parts of our personality, like whether you're an introvert or an extrovert, whether you like math or not. There are a lot of different things. But in a neurotypical brain, the lobes are actually growing at a pretty steady rate. And this is why when you go into a 3rd grade classroom, for example, most of the kids are reading at a 3rd grade level, and most of the kids are doing 3rd grade math, and most of the kids are acting like 3rd graders. But when you have a gifted brain, these 4 lobes, they actually can grow at asynchronous rates. So one may be growing much bigger, much faster, and the other might be like delayed and actually behind others. And so that's why you end up with kids who are brilliant in doing, algebra when they're 8 years old, but they are also throwing temper tantrums like they're a toddler. Or you've got a gifted author that's 15, but she can't tie her shoes. And so you can start to understand why gifted kids really need special services, special teachers that can meet them in a variety of different ways, special curriculums that can meet them where they are academically. But unfortunately, we can't just go into people's brains and figure out what's going on with their lobes, at least not easily. And so we use whatever clinical tools we have available to us. And that's where an IQ test comes in. So an IQ test doesn't tell you everything about your child. It doesn't tell you how wonderful they are in every single way, but it can give us an indication of giftedness. So if you look at this bell curve of the IQ bell curve, then right in the middle is 100 points. That's your average IQ. 68% of the population falls between 15 points above and below that middle line. So when you walk into that 3rd grade classroom, that 3rd grade curriculum is doing a pretty good job for 68% of the population. It's when you get to the outer edges, both above and below, the further away from the norm you get, the more supports these kids really need in order to thrive and be successful in a classroom. And sometimes we forget that. But IQ is really just the estimate of a person's capacity of intellect, not the product of it. I think of it often as an empty glass. A person that has a higher IQ may have a bigger empty glass, but if they don't fill that glass with knowledge and understanding and all of the supports that they need, then they aren't going to be any better off than someone who has a smaller glass but fills it to the brim. And so in order to make sure that we are like really letting these kids become the amazing resource that they could be for Texas, then we really need to be able to support them and support the programs that help them to fill these glasses. Without the proper supports, these kids are not just okay. They will misbehave, they will underachieve, they will even drop out of school. We really need to make sure that we're supporting them so that they can really truly meet their potential.
We had time between sessions. So what does that mean? This is the time when the legislators are developing their priorities. This is when they are even deciding, okay, what's on my agenda? What do I plan to do? And what are even the problems that I want to set out to solve for my constituents? This is when we, as the constituents, would try to influence the narrative. We would share our stories. We would get meetings with them. We, in fact, decided to follow the Texas Tribune's summer schedule and fall schedule for different open mic and panel events where people could come and ask questions of legislators that we're serving. The essential part of that was to always be prepared with a quick pitch. And we would walk up to someone like Representative Meyer, who was the chair of the Ways and Means Committee, and we would say something like, we understand that your constituents are heavily invested in gifted education through your school districts that you represent. Here's something that you may not have thought about, the fact that these districts are struggling to provide for their gifted programs because of the underfunding situation that we find ourselves in with the current budget. Can you help us submit legislation that would address this targeted rationale and passion that we have because of our students and where we find ourselves as families? We would then follow up with the staff that we may have met. We will listen for any words that say something like, yeah, let's meet, or let's connect more about this, and then we would follow up and we would get to know staff names. We would get to know who we need to contact. We would get to know friends of friends, or maybe someone knows a donor that was connected to one of the legislators that was a key person along this path. Our first meeting that summer was in July with Alvaro Diaz, who was the deputy legislative director for Senator Johnson that represents part of Dallas. He was enthusiastic about this ask for a GT-specific bill in the next legislative session. He encouraged us to move forward, but also gave us the heads up that we really needed to get a member of the majority party on board and authoring a bill like this for it to get good headway in the Senate. We continued our journey by continuing to ask our own Senator Paxton for a meeting. That took a while, but we were persistent and patient. We did get to meet with Chairman Meyer, who was also enthusiastic about our ask for GT programming. He was actually a key player in getting us an open door into Chairman Buckley of the Public Education Committee of the House, getting a meeting with him so that we could discuss our hopes for students across Texas in gifted and talented services. We did finally get a meeting with Senator Paxton, and we really appreciated this meeting because she kept it really intellectually honest. She would push back. She would ask questions. She would dig. We would dig in. We had our data. We were prepared, and we prevailed on her. And I don't want to give anything away, but she was definitely a key part of a future component of this journey. Finally, in November, Representative Noble filed House Bill 977. Now, House Bill 977 wasn't the exact bill that Aubrey had redlined. It was an elevation of that 5% cap to 10%, which was exciting now that we could have a maximum of 10% of student bodies qualifying for gifted and talented student services. But we were really hoping for the multiplier on the basic allotment to lift up to 12%, and it was going to remain at 7% for the time being. But that's okay, because it was a bill. It was a foot in the door. It was a starting point for wherever this journey was going to take us next.
So our virtual meeting with Representative Buckley was short and sweet. It was about 30 minutes, but he was very supportive. He was engaged. He asked a lot of questions. And ultimately, the most important part was that he asked us to come and meet with him again in Austin in January once the session had begun. And so we left that meeting knowing that we needed to really show all of these representatives and all of the legislators that we met with that this was not just a Lovejoy thing, that this was something that all of the GT programs across the state were really dealing with, and we needed to show broad support from school districts across the state. And so we went home and began to rally our community first. We asked for letters, emails, testimonies, video testimonies, anything that people were willing to give to us to show that talking about what was important about GT services for their family and also why funding increases were so important. And so then we started reaching out to the school districts around us. So for example, McKinney ISD was going through their own crisis with GT, and they were potentially losing a big chunk of their GT programming as well. So they actually got on board, sent in a ton of emails and testimonies and one-pagers. And meanwhile, a friend actually introduced me to the president of the Gifted Education Family Network. And GEFN was incredibly supportive of us. And they actually reached out to all of their constituents across the state, asking them to send in testimonies as well. So by the time January rolled around and we were ready to go back to Austin to meet with Senator Buckley, we were armed with a ton of these testimonies. We put them into booklets and made them look really good. They were really expensive, but it was totally worth it. And we were going to carry these booklets and show them and hand them out to the representatives that we met to show just how much broad support this bill really had. So here's a picture of one of my testimony, actually, that I included in the booklet, and a picture of our booklets as they were put together.
So Aubrey Stock and I had these booklets in hand, and we were making our trip in January down to Austin. Melanie couldn't join us that time, but she was signed up for the next trip. Aubrey and I left at 4 a.m. There was a rainstorm. We were about halfway to Austin when out of nowhere we started hydroplaning, and we had a horrifying accident. But by his grace alone, we were safe. We had an almost totaled car that miraculously, we were able to drive down and complete our trip to Austin. And I did have to leave the car there, but that's okay. We made it. We were determined to keep our appointments. We were determined to put voice into our cause and show up in person because that's so vital. And it was urgent. It was urgent. It was urgent for 5.5 million students all over Texas. We made it to most of our appointments. We had to reschedule with Representative Noble. But our first appointment ended up being with Senator Johnson's office, where we met Alvaro again, who encouraged us onward. He said there's good momentum in the Senate that he's working on. And we went to 12 different legislative offices giving out these booklets everywhere we went. We even delivered them to the Speaker of the House's office. We tried to find each and every opportunity. We asked advice for where should we go next? Who would be a good listening ear? Who would really get behind us in this cause? And so we leaned on the advice of legislators as well in their offices. We were met with great enthusiasm from offices like Rep. Hinojosa's office, who really rallied behind us and cheered us on. And then there was just more tepid receipt from different offices, and that's fine. They were polite and just kind of nodded along as we gave our pitch. But that's just how it goes. And at the end of the day, we were exhausted, but we were able to meet with Chairman Buckley. And actually the urgency and the fact that we had just about risked our lives to show up in Austin to speak on behalf of our community really drilled home these messages of, hey, things like security, you don't consider the price. There is no price tag on your safety and security once you've been through a situation like we have. So we made really bold asks for security and special education and for the basic allotment alongside our asks for gifted and talented, because the whole conversation altogether is relevant when you're talking about funding a district's entire budget. Towards the end of the day is when we did have our meeting with Representative Noble, and she shared some surprising news to us that caught us really off guard. She said that she would likely not be pursuing a hearing for HB 977 that she filed. The reasoning behind that, she said, was that some major stakeholders for gifted and talented services in Texas had asked her to not focus on a gifted and talented allotment, but instead focus solely on increasing the basic allotment. We were bewildered by this because our meeting back in March of the previous year, she had not been interested at all in raising the basic allotment. We had also been thinking, everyone had been assuming, oh, well, the floor from which we're going to raise the basic allotment will be at least $540, because that was the part that was where we left off in the previous session. And little did we know that a week later House Bill 2 would be filed, and it was only going to be $220 more for the basic allotment. But in that moment, we were ultimately relieved that our representative said she was going to advocate for a raised basic allotment, because at the end of the day, 7% on top of that was going to go towards gifted education programming at our school anyway. We still felt like that was a bit of a gut punch, because we had been carrying forward so much momentum, and we had letters from people, and we had legislators on our side for this one bill. But overall, we had to see the big picture, and we were relieved that hopefully, now this was before we saw what actually happened to House Bill 2, but that hopefully there would be this big push behind correcting the school funding for inflation. So you can imagine 2 weeks later what it felt like to hear from the Senate chamber, from Senator Johnson's office, that they were announcing their filing of 1613. Senate Bill 1613 was the exact same. It's called a companion bill to a House Bill 977. So we were elated. We were excited. And not only did Johnson submit this bill, but it was co-authored by our own Senator Angela Paxton. Very soon after that, Senator Tan Parker signed on as well. So this was really gaining momentum in the Senate. Unfortunately, the House seemed to be stalling on GT progress. These are some of our pictures from our exhausting and exhilarating day in the Capitol building. We would deliver our packets of parent letters everywhere we went, and we would talk through and really highlight some of the stories, and we asked for promises that everyone that received them would read through them.
So the month of February was a pretty slow one, but poor Cassie had her truck that was finally fixed in Austin, and we needed to go down to get it. So I told her I would drive her down, and on March 6th, and we would spend the day at the Capitol getting some more meetings, handing out some more booklets. The week before that, it just so happened, I had been emailing the president of the Texas Association of Gifted and Talented, TAGT, and I was asking them if they would help support the bill. Not only were they willing to, they actually said that they would be happy to meet with us in Austin that day, and we could walk around with the TAGT team and the GEFN team, and we could meet with legislators together, which was wonderful. And then I also heard from my contact at Spring Branch ISD that she was going to be bringing a group of parents and kids to Austin the day before we were going to be there to advocate for our bill, which was wonderful. And I was a little disappointed we weren't going to be there in the same day so that we could meet, but I was highly appreciated the fact that they were going to go there. So on March 6th, by the time we got there, we walked into Rep. Noble's office, and her staff was like, hey, whatever you're doing, it seems to be working. And Cassie and I were like, it is? Okay, that's last time we heard. We don't know what's going on now. And then they were like, yeah, people here are talking about your bill a lot. And then Rep. Noble actually called and asked if we would walk down so she could step off the floor and take a picture with us. And we were like, absolutely. So we went and did that. And clearly something had changed a little bit with Rep. Noble's, attitude towards the bill. And I have no doubt that at least some of it had to do with Spring Branch ISD's advocacy. And it was just a huge reminder that your voices are powerful in Austin. And they really do want to hear from people around the state. And so remember that Cassie and I are really just moms. We don't know anything that's really going on, and we're learning as we go the entire time. So there are two major things that we learned that day that we had no idea about. So the first one is that in order for a bill to allow other legislators to be able to sign on as like a co-author, joint author, any kind of support, it has to be opened. And guess what? HB 977 was never opened. And so we politely asked if she would open our bill, and we got that done. That was good. We also learned that any bill that actually needs money to support it, or needs funding, needs what they call a fiscal rider written with it. And fun fact, the deadline for the fiscal rider to be written was March 7th, the day after we were going to be in Austin. So while Cassie and I walked around with TAGT and the GEFN and met with 12 different legislators that day, the legislative advisor for TAGT actually went and sat physically in Candy Noble's office and helped them to write the fiscal rider for HB 977 and turn it in by the end of the day. And honestly, we didn't even know if it got turned in on time until we got the guts to call 2 days later and try to find out if it met the deadline. And luckily it did, but that would have been the end of our bill right there. So we did end up having several other people sign on to HB 977, but the next big step is for these two bills to get hearings in their respective chambers. And this is when people can come from all over the state. They can talk about the bill, testify for it, and the committee talks about the pros and cons, etc. We were so excited for our bills to get to this stage, but unfortunately, they never did. This was the time in the session when all of the school funding started to kind of consolidate into HB2 and SB 26, and there was a lot of really good discussion about special education funding and the basic allotment, and ultimately GT just didn't rise to the top at this session. But our advocates in Austin honestly really think that this next session, the time will be ripe for discussion again about GT services. That being said, we have learned so much in the past year, and we have really, it was a trial by fire, and we want to make sure that we leave you with a couple of tips that can maybe help you in starting your own advocacy grassroots from your own hometown. So we have these 5 Ps. The first one is plan. First, you never go and complain about a problem unless you have a solution to offer. And so know exactly what it is you want your legislators to do. We wanted the increased cap, the increased multiplier, and we handed her the document that would explain exactly how to do it. It's as simple as possible. You want the easiest way to make them say yes. And then know why you want them to do it. So legislators really do want to feel like they're helping their constituents. We heard over and over and over again how much legislators appreciated hearing from parents versus a paid lobbyist from a school district. And our voices are really powerful. Tell them your stories, make them understand how what they're doing is affecting your child. And it really will help them to understand and feel the importance of what you're asking.
The next one is package, which I have a weakness in because I am someone with ideaphoria. Every detail is so important, and I get excited about it all. And this was important for me to funnel it down to a little elevator pitch and say everything I want to say in one sentence. So, for example, I would say, I have 2 asks. One is lift the cap for eligibility from 5% to 10% of the student body for gifted and talented identification. My second ask is that we restore the multiplier on the basic allotment to the historic 12%. And then pause, and then wait for their response. That was so important for me to practice, to get down pat. I made sure to stay on message, to be clear, concise, and compelling. Be prepared with my own stories of how this really impacts and really hurts students like mine. We had handouts. Aubrey was very talented at creating really beautifully well-done graphics that would present our case. And with her law experience as well, that was key in drafting a bill to have it ready to hand over.
And then present. So find your core group of 2 or 3 people. 2 or 3 people is kind of ideal for legislative offices because those offices are so small. I mean, when we had TAGT and GEFN with us, we often couldn't get everyone into the door. And so it also helps to keep those discussions intimate. They remember your name and your face when there's only a few people. But it also worked well for us because we had kind of specific roles we were playing. And so I was kind of the GT, the person who lives and breathes GT. So I could field those questions. I was kind of their, topic expert. Aubrey actually has a law degree, and so she was our policy expert. She was also incredibly good with graphics. And then Cassie has had 2 roles as well. She is an incredible advocate. I mean, she is a girl who will not take no for an answer and will just keep us going whenever we run into roadblocks. And that was honestly so important because you do run into so many roadblocks. And if you stop, you just stop. And it is a roller coaster. You really need to stay the course no matter what happens. And she was that's a really important role. She's also an incredible data person. She was good at pulling data and analyzing data and showing the data, and that data is just as important. Second of all, prepare 2-minute, 15-minute, and 30-minute presentations. Most of our meetings were 30 minutes, but you run into one problem. You need to know how to cut that to 15. And then a 2-minute presentation when you are meeting with a legislator at an event or just on the street, then give them a pitch for 2 minutes and secure a meeting for a further follow-up. And then third of all, know what to do in the face of pushback. Really know your data. Legislators aren't often experts on any specific topic because they have to have input on a variety of different things. They rely on their staff to be able to get them the information they need. But you probably know your data more than they do. So know where it came from, understand it, and really feel confident in what you have when you're speaking with them. And then partner. So even though I just said that 2 or 3 people is ideal for a small group, you will not be successful without a whole bunch of people behind you. And so this list is just a list of a few of the people that we worked with to help, get as far as we did. And I couldn't be more appreciative. Make sure that you reach out to anyone who has the same goal as you. We all want what is best for our gifted kids, and so we're all kind of in the same boat. We should be working together.
Finally, persist. When there was no appetite for the basic allotment, we pivoted. Aubrey decided she was kind of one of our key strategy person in our team. Sure. And she decided, let's try a targeted approach. Let's focus on GT. This is one of our big pain points, so let's go for it. And that was actually really compelling, and it realigned us with where our representation was really headed, especially when we tied it into future commerce and business and investment. Ultimately, we used that to repurpose it for the basic allotment, and we returned to the basic allotment as the ultimate ask. What we want to leave you with is the fact that there are 6 legislative sessions between kindergarten and graduation. Make sure that your child's priorities are our representation's priorities.